Welcome back to Figuring It Out. I'm Rachel Lee. If you're new here, this is a space where we don't pretend to have everything figured out. We get real about where we're at and figure it out as we go. So if something in this episode resonates with you, please follow the podcast, leave a review, or send it to someone who might need to hear it too. So today's episode is a little heavier than maybe previous ones. Not dramatic, not performative, just a real one. Because it is May and it is Mental Health Awareness Month. And there is something I've been thinking about a lot lately. The way people speak so casually about suicide, mental health, and emotional pain without realizing who might be listening. And before I go any further into this, I want to say this clearly. I'm not ashamed that my brother died by suicide. I'm sad. I miss the fuck out of my brother. And I think there's a difference there. But losing someone that way changes how you hear people. It changes what you notice. It changes what stands out. And honestly, it changes how you see people too. Because people around you will say things so casually, like, oh my God, if that happened to me, I'd just kill myself. I couldn't handle that. Or that would make me off myself. And most of the time, they're joking. They don't even think about it. But when you've actually lived through suicide touching your life, you hear those comments differently. And then there are also people who say people who commit suicide are selfish. And listen, I understand why people feel that way sometimes. Because the aftermath of suicide is brutal. The people left behind are the ones carrying the grief, the confusion, the guilt, the questions, the pain, the anger, the reconciliation of it all. That part is real. But I'm also deeply thankful that I have never experienced a moment where I truly believed that was my only option. And I think that matters too, because I don't think most people who die by suicide genuinely believe everyone will be devastated without them. A lot of times, I think they believe the opposite, that people would somehow be better off, that the pain they're experiencing will stop, that there's no way out, that they are the burden. And that's heartbreaking to me, because pain changes perception. And mental health struggles don't always look the way people think they do. And honestly, my brother Jason is probably one of the clearest examples of that in my life. Because if you knew my brother Jason, you probably wouldn't have picked him as the one. He was charismatic, funny as hell, witty, good looking, had these ridiculously blue eyes and a smirk that could light up an entire room. He could control a room with humor and personality without even trying. All he had to do was walk in. And honestly, I think part of why I'm funny comes from him and our dad. Jason always used to say never, because never is a long time. And that sentence has stayed with me my entire life. He also used to tell my sister and me, don't do what I do. Learn from it. Because he struggled a lot. Addiction, mental health, being in and out of jail and prison. And I want to say this clearly too. Jason never wanted that life for us. Ever. He loved us deeply. And despite everything he struggled with, one thing I always knew growing up was this. If shit hit the fan, or was about to for that matter, Jason was showing up. When I got suspended in 7th grade for fighting in the hallway because I was standing up for my sister, my parents were furious. Jason, he was proud of me. When I went through trauma as a teenager, he was one of the only people, in fact, the person who stood up for me. And if I needed someone to run interference with our mom as an adult, Jason was absolutely the go-to. He was complicated, funny, protective, broken in places, loving in places, human. And I think sometimes when people talk about suicide, addiction, or mental health, they reduce people down to the worst thing that happened to them. But Jason was so much more than the way he died. He was my brother, and I miss him. And I think that's part of why conversations around mental health matter so much to me now. Because most humans will struggle with themselves at some point in their life. Maybe not suicidal ideation, but shame, self-hatred, hopelessness, anxiety, feeling overwhelmed, feeling emotionally exhausted, feeling like they're carrying too much. That's human. And honestly, grief and pain play into so many of the survival patterns I talk about on this podcast. Overfunctioning, people pleasing, overcommitting, over involving yourself in everybody else's life. A lot of those things are rooted in pain people never fully processed. Sometimes staying busy is easier than sitting with yourself. Sometimes helping everybody else feels easier than admitting you're struggling too. And I know that because I've lived parts of that myself. Not perfectly, not constantly, but enough to recognize it. Especially because healing and mental health are rarely linear. And one thing I've realized over the years is that mental health struggles are patient, kind of like addiction. People think if someone is doing well for a while, it means the struggle completely disappears forever. And sometimes that's not how it works. That doesn't mean people are doomed. It means awareness matters, support matters, expression matters, honesty matters. Because silence is dangerous. And honestly, this is probably the part where some people may disagree with me, but I mean it honestly. When people speak carelessly about suicide or mental health, I notice. And not because I'm fragile, but because your words tell me something about your emotional awareness and your capacity for nuance. Because when someone says things like, people who kill themselves are selfish, or casually joke about killing themselves over minor inconveniences, what I hear is, you don't fully understand pain outside your own perspective. And maybe you've been fortunate enough not to have to. But you also don't realize what those comments communicate to the people around you. Because if someone near you is struggling, if someone near you is having dark thoughts, if someone near you feels ashamed of what's happening in their mind, why would they ever feel emotionally safe opening up around language like that? That's the part people miss. You never really know who's listening when you speak. And I think one of the reasons people stay silent around suicide is shame. A lot of families don't talk openly, and shame keeps things hidden. Shame can keep things in closets. Shame keeps people suffering silently. And I've never wanted Jason's story to live in silence. Because if talking about him helps even one person feel less alone, if it helps one person ask for help, if it makes one person think differently about how they speak to others or around others, then absolutely I'll talk about him. I'll say his name and I'll remember him fully because he mattered far beyond that day he died, in the way he died. And losing someone that way changes you in ways you don't even fully realize at first. And I also think grief in general just changes how you hear people forever. Maybe not in a bitter way, just in an aware way. There are certain comments now where I internally think, oh, okay, all right, I know who you are. And not because I think people are evil, but because sometimes people unintentionally reveal the limits of their empathy. And honestly, most people don't mean harm. I think a lot of people simply haven't experienced certain kinds of pain, so they speak about them carelessly until life humbles them, or touches someone they love, or forces them to understand something they never thought they'd have to understand. And unfortunately, almost nobody is immune from mental health touching their life somehow, whether it be through themselves, their child, their sibling, their spouse, their friend, somebody, which is exactly why these conversations matter more than people even think they do. That's why language matters. So before we wrap up, I want to say this too. This episode isn't about walking on eggshells with people. It's not about policing every word that people say. It's simply about awareness. It's about recognizing that human beings are carrying things you cannot see. And sometimes the strongest looking people are carrying the heaviest things internally. I miss my brother. I always will. And I think one of the best things we can do as human beings is create environments where people feel safe enough to say, I'm struggling, without immediately feeling judged, dismissed, mocked, or ashamed. Because no one should have to suffer silently just because they're afraid of how people will respond. Thank you so much for listening and being here today. I'm Rachel Lee, and I'll see you next time as we keep figuring it out.